I want to start just by asking you a personal question. Um, you know, you were one of the first stops on Donald Trump's revenge tour after he was reelected, and you are currently, I suppose, sitting under a kind of sword of Damocles, waiting to find out if, in fact, there will be a further retaliation against you, as there have been against other former Trump administration officials. Can you tell us about where things stand at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say, um, if anyone wants to take a vacation to federal prison, let's take a selfie afterwards, and you can just post it on your social media, and we'll just increase the risks to you too, because that's how arbitrary this has become. Now, I mean, one of the things I would say, Justin, in response to, waiting for the sword to come down, from the vantage point of my family, the sword has already come down. By the president issuing this executive order against me in April, which legal scholars called and told me was the first time in 249 years of America's existence that a president had issued an executive order directing a federal investigation into a known critic for First Amendment protected speech. That had never happened before. Just that act was enough to detonate our lives this year. I'd been running a business in Washington, D.C., a tech company near Capitol Hill. 50 people were dependent on me for their paychecks, gone, eviscerated after that blacklisting happened. But that was just one piece of it. I mean, we have dealt with death threats, financial uncertainty, and then the personal ramifications of friends and family who are just terrified that they will somehow get swept into a TBD government investigation by mere association. And so that's why I've been out there regularly saying, look, people, the process is the punishment. And there's almost nothing that can be done to prevent the President of the United States from initiating those processes. And in fact, you see with a lot of recent cases, they don't really care if they lose in federal court because they already know that the process is the punishment. They already know that the blacklisting is so devastating. So, we've been dealing with that. But I will say, the last thing I'll note on that, Justin, is the way this is going to get scaled up is a big concern for me. And part of that, involves technology that the administration will avail itself of. But I would guarantee you that anyone in this room has committed a federal crime. Really. The question is, will the U.S. government decide to look at you to try to find that crime? Did you ever download a song on Napster? Have you ever rounded up on your donations on your tax form that you made to Goodwill? Have you always declared every single thing you've come back into the United States with through customs? Little known fact, a pack of gum undeclared when you come back in is a federal crime. You have all committed a federal crime at some point. What's alarming is that now we have selective enforcement of those investigations in the United States. And like I said, I'm one tiny example of that. We're seeing a lot of indicators that that's going to scale to a lot of opposition figures and groups.
A lot of officials going back over their mortgage applications right now, making sure they check
Yeah,
the right
yeah,
boxes.
exactly.
So let's go back just a little bit. 2020, the campaign. You had essentially revealed yourself and your role in blowing the whistle. And you had said, make no mistake, I am a Republican. You served under 2 Republican administrations. You said, and I wanted this president to succeed. I saw Donald Trump prove he is a man without character. You went on to talk about the idea that Congress had proven itself not enough of a check, that what you called well-intentioned, unelected bureaucrats around the president were not enough of a check. And in the context of the election, you said the people themselves are the ultimate check. Well, here we are. Fewer guardrails, fewer well-intentioned bureaucrats, I think is a safe way to say it. A neutered Congress, a sycophantic or at best silent court, a president who's more than proven he's willing to operate outside the law. Is the answer still the same for you today? What can stand in the way?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think largely is. I think it really is the people themselves. Most of the guardrails are gone. And I don't blame anyone, by the way, who initially saw that anonymous opinion piece and said, screw this guy. This self important, unelected bureaucrat who thinks he's a guardrail against the president of the United States. And I sympathize with some of that feeling. What I will say, though, is I think it is now evident to everyone that the axis of adults' thesis, as obnoxious as it was holding back a great deal of extraordinarily grave actions. Almost everything that Donald Trump has done since returning to office was something he talked about privately doing in the first term, in some way, shape, or form. And little annoying, I'm going to commit to my oath to the Constitution, guys and gals like me, were like, I don't think I should break the law for the president. That was enough to keep a lot of these things from happening. Now, there was a popular mischaracterization when I put that piece out that I was somehow describing a deep state within the federal government intent on taking the president down. Certainly, Donald Trump himself made great use of that caricature. And in some ways, my divisive anonymity furthered his ability to do that. But in actuality, that cabal of unelected bureaucrats was not people defying the lawful orders of commander-in-chief. It was just as I said. It was people who said, look, it's my job to not break the law for the president. And we were regularly on the receiving end of a great deal of unlawful, unconstitutional, and deeply reprehensible orders, many of which you are seeing now, which is why I spent several years after I came forward trying to paint as clear of a picture as possible of what would happen. It's funny, I put out this book in 2023. It's called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from Trump's Revenge. Universally, Trump and his allies came out after I published the book and said, this is all BS. I think his spokesperson said, use it to wipe your butt with toilet paper. This is useless. It's all lies. I just went back and did an assessment how much of that book has come to fruition in the first 9 months of the second Trump administration. Almost 80% of the predictions I made have already come to fruition. This is a lot faster than I thought they were going to be able to move. So much for made up sky is falling lies. But to your question, Justin, the unelected bureaucrats aren't there anymore that are willing to stand up to their oaths to the Constitution. We've already seen so many federal courts rule that the administration's actions are unconstitutional. So where were the officials that were supposed to stop that from going forward before it got to reality? They're not there. I think we all know that. Congress, you already mentioned, sidelined willingly. The courts, the Article 3 courts in the United States, are a very, very fragile bulwark right now. And the only thing stopping them from succeeding is the willingness of the executive branch to put up with judicial orders. And I would forecast in the next 4 years, you will see a major decision that contradicts the administration in federal court at the highest levels that the administration willfully defies, that so clearly puts us into a period of constitutional crisis. I would argue we're in that period right now, but that moment's going to happen. So that leaves the people. And unfortunately, I hate to repeat this to folks, you're going to have to do it again because Donald Trump intends to be president in 2028. Don't sneeze at Steve Bannon's comments this week where he said Donald Trump will be president in 2028. They're very committed to this. They are bringing a lot of the election deniers from 2020 and 2024 into the department that I used to run, the department that oversaw election integrity for the U.S. electoral system is now run by the people who want to hijack elections, among many other things. And so it really is going to have to be the voters and popular mobilization that keep this administration in check, if possible, and prevent its continuance.
Let's talk a little bit about the Department of Homeland Security. It's effectively now a kind of weapon.
Yeah.
It's the sort of sharp end of Donald Trump's immigration campaign. ICE and CBP are the brawn, but there's an intelligence function as well, which takes advantage of huge investment now in surveillance. The big, beautiful bill puts billions more into that effort. You have said, I believe, in starting your career, the events of September 11th, 2001, inspired you into service. You have worked in national security. Um, Along the way, of course, there have been many who've warned about DHS and its acquisition of technology, its acquisition of power in the federal intelligence apparatus. When you look at DHS now, what do you think of it, and what do you think perhaps should be done in a different political moment to blunt this end of the sword that we're seeing engage in lawless activity on American streets?
Yeah, look, there was an argument many of you heard after 9/11, and some of you probably went out there and made, which was that a department like DHS, created for the expressed purpose of preventing another 9/11, in the wrong hands, could be a very, very dangerous organization. Now, I was one of those people who fought you when you made that argument. I worked in the Bush administration, was in DHS in the very early days when it was stood up, working under Michael Chertoff when he was Secretary of Homeland Security, was a big proponent that this department had done a lot to break down the walls that had resulted in 9/11, and then subsequently put together a truly impressive systematic architecture for identifying, watch listing, and delivering justice to terrorists as defined under federal law, right? Individuals who intend to intimidate or coerce a civilian population through targeted violence. Hell yeah, I thought, we did it. We've built an organization that does that. And civil libertarians came to me at the time, Justin, like they did many other Republicans in Washington, and said, you're building something that in the hands of a corrupt or authoritarian leader could be used against the people. And my response was, sounds like a great Orwell sequel. They were right. I was wrong. And as a consequence of some of that resistance from my side of the political spectrum, the safeguards that should have been in place, somewhere like a Department of Homeland Security, they are not there. This is still a very young, very immature department that doesn't have sufficient civil rights and civil liberties protections in place. I believe that strongly, having served there in 2 different administrations. And I will also add, even the media doesn't even know how to provide transparency and accountability of DHS, let alone the Congress. They don't understand it. And in fact, to a lot of people, DHS has been considered kind of a boring, confusing, bureaucratic backwater. There just isn't the same attention. I mean, look at the way the media is struggling to cover what's happening at the Pentagon, which has got a far deeper legacy of oversight and media coverage. Compare that to the Department of Homeland Security, and you'll see why a lot of these things are going to happen before you even know about them. And I would say, Justin, my worry is that DHS is becoming essentially the pocket police for the president. And I recently said that the Secretary of Homeland Security, whoever is in that job, is the warden of Donald Trump's police state. Because a lot of the functions of the department used to go after terrorists could just as easily be shifted to go after the political opposition. I've been saying that for years. And then last month, the administration issued something, I think the single most important executive order of this presidency, called National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, NSPM 7, which basically lays out this entire system for designating domestic terrorist groups in defiance of Congress. When I worked on Capitol Hill, we said, no, we don't want a domestic terrorist designation system because a president of the opposite party could use that to go after groups. Like, Congress decided not to pass a law like that. Well, the president created it anyway, and the system allows him to designate terrorist groups and then opens the door to the watch listing of any Americans that fall under those categories. Go read NSPM 7. Anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-capitalist beliefs are indicated as terrorism indicators.
And anti-fascist.
And anti-fascist. Those are now terrorism indicators in the United States of America, and open the door to DHS through its vast systems of watch listing, tracking, investigating, to hoover those people in and bring them into that revenge machine.
So we're going to turn to tech in just a moment, but I want to just entertain your dark fantasies just a little bit more.
Yeah, we should have called this session Dark Fantasies with Miles Taylor.
Well, I know that Rocky Horror Picture Show is here in a week, and we could have dressed differently and perhaps had a
That's
different.
right.
So, how bad could it get? The words "insurrection act" are coming out of the mouths of people around Donald Trump, and as you've written, it does look like some of these deployments in American streets appear to be uh, to goad people into conflict and potentially to use that to ratchet up the deployment of federal troops into American cities. Where do you think we'll be in 9 months' time? Let's hope your sort of 80% rule isn't
Yeah.
necessarily right.
Well, look, on the Insurrection Act, this one I think is so crucial. When I came forward and unmasked myself in 2020, the very first thing I started talking about, once I was able to start providing detail, here's the meeting, here's where I was, here's what was said, was to talk about the Insurrection Act and to talk about the different circumstances in my service in the first Trump administration in which I'd seen the president want to invoke the Insurrection Act. And I revealed a term he used for it behind the scenes. In the Oval Office one day, he had referred to this as his magical authorities, and another time as his magical powers. The President of the United States thinks he has something that in his mind is equivalent to magical powers, and that thing is the Insurrection Act. Because when he came into office, he asked the lawyers, essentially, what is the zenith of presidential authority? Now, those weren't the words that Donald Trump used, I'm sure. But he got an answer to that question, which is the closest thing to martial law in the U.S. system of government is this invocation of the Insurrection Act and the ability to unilaterally direct the United States military from the presidency to go enforce domestic law. And under the right circumstances, insurrection or rebellion, there's basically no limit to how a president could deploy that. I mean, you want to go, revoke or approve business licenses? Look, if that's a domestic legal function of some authority, hypothetically, under the Insurrection Act, that could be grandfathered in as a function that the military would take over if the Insurrection Act's invoked. I mean, it could go from mild to wild really, really quickly if it happens, which is why it was the first thing I started publicly warning about, is saying, look, the guy is fantasizing about doing this. Now, what's happening right now is his team is trying, as we used to do, every day to keep Donald Trump from blurting this out into existence. Now, we did it at the time because we didn't want it to happen. They're trying to stop him because they're like, the fact pattern isn't quite there yet for this to survive in federal court. They want to see violence in American cities that is so shocking to the conscience of the public that it will be sufficient if the Insurrection Act invocation comes to justify it to the courts. Look, you got to defer to the president. So that could happen. I think there's a very high likelihood in the next year that the invocation happens. I think there's a good chance it happens by the end of the year. And they'll use it in targeted cases, but that will be a slippery slope, and it will get deployed in a lot of other realms, and then the gloves are off, so to speak. Where could this go from a dark perspective? Look, I alluded to it earlier with Bannon's comments. I mean, they're saying that out loud. He intends to have an unconstitutional third term, and like other things, they're going to try to pursue the path of least resistance. I mean, take this forecast to the bank. I think the likeliest thing that they intend to do is to, of course, run J.D. Vance at the top of the ticket and Donald Trump as the vice president in 2028. And the whole thing is going to be a clever own the libs wink nod joke. Like, you all know that once JD wins, he'll resign and Trump will go into that position, or he'll just run it from the office of the vice president. And people will think that's hilarious and clever, and the t-shirts will be all about it. And then it'll happen. If they fail in doing that, there's you heard Bannon allude to a whole bunch of other scenarios that they've considered. Donald Trump himself has openly considered the possibility that House Republicans might name him Speaker of the House. You don't have to be an elected member of Congress to be named the Speaker. You just need a majority of the chamber to put you in. So he could, if he loses, still by fiat, have them put him in as the third in line to the presidency as Speaker. There's a whole number of machinations that can happen here. The scariest, of course, is what happened in 2020. And so this is not a stretch of the imagination to say that this guy is going to try to stay in office. I don't know how loudly I can say that to people. I said it before 2020. I said he's not going to give up power if he loses. He has said civil wars are in the offing and coups are afoot. Those were my words verbatim. I said it for months. After he lost the election, his own chief of staff, someone I knew very well, said, "This is silly. There's going to be a peaceful transition of power." No, there wasn't, but it was obvious. It's obvious right now that Donald Trump will not give up power in 2028. What does that mean for the United States of America? What did it mean for us in 2020? It was very bad. In this case, though, I don't think he fails in the effort.
I want to turn to tech and to AI in particular, and there are many Tech Policy Press contributors who are here at this conference. On Tech Policy Press, many folks have warned for quite some time about this kind of combination of tech and state power, and in particular, concerns around tech firms as the centuries and the infrastructure of American imperialism. You know a thing or two about tech, of course. You've been a tech executive. You've worked at Google. You are engaged right now, I believe, in helping start tech firms. How do you look at this question in this particular moment? Where does the sort of current situation with regard to American tech firms and their relationship to the state sit with you? How surprised are you at the behavior of the oligarchs?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think any of us are surprised. I mean, they see opportunity and they are seizing it with alacrity. And I will confess to you, I'd much rather be talking to you about tech than Donald Trump. It's absolutely the last thing I want to be talking to you all about. My heart and soul is in technology policy and national security. Had been helping a number of quantum computing companies, space companies, AI companies, etc., figure out how to best use their products for the public good, how to best cooperate with government. But of course, in the wake of Trump's executive order, a lot of that work has been stymied. But that said, I have, as you would expect, grave concerns about how a lot of emerging tech companies and legacy tech companies are engaging with the administration. And I will say they are sort of by default making huge public policy decisions behind the scenes without any public consideration. What do I mean by that? Take the example of Palantir. Widely reported that Palantir, where I have a lot of friends that work, Palantir is winning a whole bunch of government contracts and basically pledging to be the connective tissue between enormous packets of data inside the federal government. Well, if you were a part of the debates post 9/11 about creating mass searchable government databases, you would know that something like this was roundly rejected. The efforts to break down the walls and intelligence sharing inside the federal government were successful to a point, but a lot of people wanted to go further. And the Congress said, no, we draw a line. Without any congressional debate, without any public discussion, this has basically already happened. Palantir's come in, it's plugged into the back of a lot of these systems and agencies, facilitated by an early blitz by Doge, and now enormous data sets about the American people are being commingled and used in ways that are not yet obvious to us. And I don't think we know. And I'll tie that back to the retribution piece. I mean, just take what happened. I mean, today, I think as we speak, New York Attorney General Letitia James is being arraigned in a federal courthouse for dubious trumped-up charges that stemmed from, early in this administration, the Federal Housing Finance Agency found some documents, some mortgage documents that she must have written wrong. How on earth did that come to fruition? Why on earth did the CIA director share foreign intelligence information with the FBI director about another Trump target, John Bolton? How on earth did they find these other mortgage documents about Adam Schiff? I think there's a lot of worry right now that these systems are being commingled to make it easier to find derogatory information on targets of the administration, and that's being facilitated by tech. And I'm not sure we'll know the answer for quite some time, probably years, about how extensive this is right now.
I want to ask you about another thing that has been discussed a little bit at this conference, which is, MAGA is not a monolith, and we see sort of different perspectives on tech across the right. There's a kind of populist side of the MAGA movement, and Steve Bannon perhaps represents it, that is also very skeptical of artificial intelligence. They were opposed to the proposed moratorium on state enforcement of artificial intelligence regulation, for instance. They're often quite concerned about things like data centers and AI infrastructure in ways that one might not expect them to be. What do you make of that, and where do you think that might go? What might resistance look like to AI in a few years' time?
I mean, you're already seeing it with, well, look, within the MAGA movement, you're seeing it from like the Marjorie Taylor Greene crowd and the Steve Bannon crowd. They don't like that the tech folks are in this administration. And I will say, and probably a lot of the credit is to JD Vance, they've done a masterful job of co-opting the tech sector. The tech sector was enormously important in generating opposition to Donald Trump in the first term. You saw these companies, you saw the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Googles and the others of the world really standing up against the administration. They've all been brought to heel completely. And I remember this vividly. When I started at Google as their head of emerging technology policy, I was protested my first week on the job as a Donald Trump stormtrooper. 24,000 Google employees, 24,000 people signed a letter that I should be fired from Google for being a Trump stormtrooper. Now, at the time, I was like, oh, God, if you guys only knew I'm getting ready to come forward to fight this guy. I just needed to land somewhere in the meantime. Story for another time. But there was enormous resistance to these things from the tech sector. Now, they've very successfully co-opted those folks. Where could we see this change? I mean, I genuinely think it's what you saw with Jimmy Kimmel and Disney. I mean, users and employees are going to change this. But users and employees need to get very upset about these companies being used to facilitate abuses of power. And so far, we haven't seen that yet. I mean, did Apple employees storm out of their glass circle when Tim Cook walked into the Oval Office and gave a gold-plated gift to the President of the United States? Tim Cook hates Donald Trump. All of these tech CEOs hate Donald Trump. But they see extraordinary profit opportunity. And it's tough to blame them because this administration is for sale. Pay for a chunk of the ballroom, you're going to get favorable regulatory treatment. And so they're doing it. So I've never, ever depended on the fragile spinal cords of tech CEOs. I think they're the snowflakiest people out there on the planet. Their users, their employees have spines. And those are the ones that could change their perspective, their direction, and their decisions about whether to enable abuses of power.
You have an audience here of people from civil society, from academia, from media, advocates who are concerned about tech and democracy. They have heard you talk about standing up to Trump. What would you tell them to do to help defend or restore democracy in the near term? What would you hope that people would get up to?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say this in short. It's a supply and demand problem. And I talk about this a lot with college students, mostly because they've just probably taken Econ 101, and so they can visualize the supply and demand curves. But right now, whether it's in tech policy, civil society, beyond, the price of dissent is extraordinarily high. I was just at a dinner the other week of someone who's the head of communications for a climate nonprofit in Washington, D.C. We didn't know each other. Our wives knew each other. And he sat down and he started at the dinner talking about how he was like, it's a really scary time to be out there stating your opinion. I thought about writing this climate op-ed and I don't think I'm going to do it. And afterwards, my wife was like, she's like, I don't think he knows what we've been through lately. But people are scared to like posts. I have people on Substack ask me, if I like this, am I going to be watch listed? Which sounds crazy and conspiracy theorist and tinfoil hat. But then you turn on the news. And so I would say this, if the price of dissent is that high in the United States, that there's that level of social fear, if it's that extraordinary, then Econ 101 tells us there's only two ways to lower that price. You can either decrease the demand and lower the price like you would any other good in any other market, but we don't really want to decrease the demand for truth and honesty and transparency and dissent, even if we disagree with it. We don't want to decrease the demand. So the only other way we can lower that price and have someone like me sit up here on the stage and lots of other stages and not wonder, is someone in that crowd going to pull a gun on me? Which I have to wonder every time I go out there. My wife tells me, don't go to things like this. She doesn't want me to speak publicly. But the only way to lower that price is to increase the supply. We know that from every market on this planet. And it applies just as equally to dissent as it does to any other good. And it's not something people at the top are going to be able to determine. It's not our congressional leaders who are going to be able to increase the supply. It is you. It's the people that follow you. That is what lowers the price of dissent. So that would be my message.
A clear call. A round of applause for Miles Taylor.